I hope it's okay with everybody if I sit, that way you have an easier time seeing the screen. So as Rex mentioned, I'm Brandy Blue, Honors Admission Specialist by day, and on nights and weekends I have served as a GRE test prep instructor for UCF Test Prep, which is an office that works out of UCF here. I'm kind of on hiatus from the job. I had a child recently, and so I've been wanting to spend more time with my baby, but I might be picking it up again in the near future. But in the meantime, kind of like riding a bike, I still remember a lot of it. So even if I'm not actively teaching, I still feel like I'm a pretty decent expert on what to expect from the GRE exam. So I am going to go ahead and pass my card around. Hopefully everybody will take one, because as I mentioned, if you do need to leave early, please don't be afraid to email me and ask, hey, can you send me the materials from the GRE workshop? Or if you have questions as you're doing your own GRE prep in the future, I'm more than happy to answer questions, everything from the broad general topics to, I ran across this GRE practice problem. What do you think the answer is? I'm always happy to help with any level of GRE prep for you guys. There we go, okay. So you may be asking yourself, okay, so who needs to take the GRE exam? Hopefully you're a little bit familiar with what the GRE is. That's why you're at the workshop today. But in case you're not, the GRE is essentially the SAT, but to get into graduate school. So if you're planning, thank you, on pursuing a master's degree, a PhD, even some students who want to do an MBA can consider taking the GRE exam. You would want to contact the schools that you're planning to apply to see whether they require the GRE or accept the GRE before taking the time and money to take the GRE. But a lot of business schools will accept the GRE. So if you're applying to a wide range of schools, the GRE might be a good option for you. And again, you should always check the admission requirements for your program. And when you're doing so, it may not be a bad idea to ask, is there a minimum GRE requirement to get in? And also, what was the average for the students who started in your program? Because some schools have a minimum, but the minimum's not helpful because their average is much higher and it's more competitive. Other programs, the minimum might be good enough to get you in, so it never hurts to have both of those numbers in the back of your mind as you're getting ready to apply. And I would contact each program individually that you're applying to, because unlike undergraduate, graduate admissions, each program is its own unique thing that you might be applying to, almost a little fiefdom, so to speak, a little kingdom. They have their own rules. So it's not like a wide blanket the way undergraduate admissions might be. So be in conversation with each grad school that you might be applying to find out what they're looking for specifically. So what do you need to know about the GRE? I'm going to talk about the format of the exam and the functionality, how you take the GRE exam. I'm going to talk about the score reports and the scale. The scale is kind of funny looking compared to some of the other exams that you might have taken to get into college. And then content, what's on the GRE, what are they going to test you? And then as I mentioned at the end, the last half hour, we'll cover some sample questions, all right? So format and functionality. First thing you should know, it is a computer-based test. So when you go in to take it, you're going to be sitting in front of a computer. It's still primarily a multiple choice test, so you'll be clicking on answers, but unlike the SAT where you could write on the scratchbook to cross out answers and things like that, you can't do that on the computer screen. So be advised it's a computer-based test, and you'll want to practice with the computer-based version at least once before you go in to take the exam. But they will provide scratch paper and pencils to you so that you do have the ability to take notes, work out your math problems, things like that. They do provide an in-program basic calculator for you. So think of like when you go into the start menu on your computer, if you have like a Windows computer and you pull up calculator, that's kind of the level of calculator we're talking here. So it's not a graphing calculator. It's not going to do all your math for you. Basic functions, square roots, things like that is what the calculator will be able to do for you. Provided just, of course, for the math sections, because you're not going to need it for the verbal sections. You do have your ability to change and edit your answers. So you can skip around the test as needed to go back to answers and change them if you thought, oh wait, I should have this as the answer instead. You have the ability to mark questions so that it's easier to go back and find them. So if you're working on a question and you're really not sure of your answer, or if you're thinking to yourself, hey, this is going to take too much of my time, I should skip it and come back to it. You can put a little mark on it. When you get to the end of the section, you can review all your marked questions and go back to find them more easily. So again, since you can't flip through a booklet, you have to count on the computer to do the moving through questions for you. And there's no penalty for incorrect answers. So when you're taking the GRE, every question should have an answer in it, because anything is better than a 0% chance of getting the right answer. So always put an answer in. Even if you're randomly guessing eeny, meeny, miny, mo, mark it, come back to it if you've got time for it. But unlike the older version of the SAT, you're not penalized for incorrect answers, so there should always be an answer in every question. So the format itself, there's basically three types of sections to the GRE exam. The first will always be your analytical writing section. You're gonna write 2 essays. One, you get 30 minutes to write on the issue task, and then you get 30 minutes analyzing an argument. And it'll always be the first section you have. So you always gotta write those essays first. Then the next 5 sections will be random. So you might get math next, you might get verbal next, you don't know. But you will get a grand total of 2 verbal sections that will count towards your score, 30 minutes apiece for the verbal sections. There'll be 20 questions. The quantitative reasoning sections, again, there'll be 2 of those that count towards your score, 35 minutes for the math sections, still 20 questions. So each verbal section has 20 questions, each math section has 20 questions. And then you'll have an unscored research experimental section. And so this one may or may not be identified as experimental. So don't assume it's an experimental section unless they tell you it is. But it will probably look like either one of the verbal sections or one of the math sections you've already had. So when you walk out on test day and you're like, wow, I had 3 math sections. I guess one of those was the experimental one. I hope it's the one I did the worst on. That's probably what your feeling is gonna be on it. And they use that section to test questions before they start counting towards people's scores. Yes?
Is it always the last one, or?
Nope, it could be at any point in that 5 that's random. So you won't have an experimental essay section, that's good. But the extra math or extra verbal, one of them will have been your experimental section. Okay. In terms of breaks, you have optional breaks between sections, 10 minutes between the 3rd and 4th sections, whatever those end up being for you, and then an optional 1-minute break between the other sections. If you don't want to take a break, you don't have to. If you need to just stand up and stretch real quick, you can do that. The 10-minute break would be if you feel like you need to make some adjustments to, say, the number of layers you're wearing or things like that, or you've got to go eat that energy bar you brought with you to cram in your face in the middle of the test. You would do that during the 10-minute break, not during a 1-minute break, hopefully. So questions about the test format at this point, all the different sections. I'll talk in more detail what they cover coming up. So the scoring scale. The GRE sections are each, the quantitative score and the verbal score are each on a scale of 130 to 170. So you can get anywhere from a 260 to a 340 on your GRE exam, okay? It's 1-point increments. The writing section is its own separate 6-point scale, and those are measured in half-point increments. So with the writing section, they're not bonus points added to your score. It's a completely separate 6-point scale. The reason they designed the scores with the 1-point increments is so that it's easier to compare a student who maybe got one question wrong compared to another, instead of having a 10 or a 20-point gap like you did on the old scale, which looked like the SAT. Students compare more closely. So you may be asking, okay, so what's a good score on this scale? Well, of course, the answer is it depends. As I mentioned, each grad school is its own thing, its own kingdom. It has its own rules about what they're looking for. So it never hurts to ask, again, what are your minimums? And what was the average for your incoming class, to get an idea of where you might be in the ballpark. Like a 300 is, a passable score, pretty good for a lot of programs, but if your program's more competitive, you might want to aim more for a 310, a 315, maybe even a 320, okay? Kind of what you're looking for there. And with the writing score, it also doesn't hurt to ask your school what was the minimum writing score and what was the average writing score. A lot of grad programs don't put a lot of weight on the GRE writing score, and you'll see why, because it's basically a very basic writing level. And so if they don't have an answer to what was the average writing score, chances are they probably don't care. So I actually had a student in one of the classes I took who was applying to a computer science program, and he said, well, the advisor told me that I could get a 0 and they wouldn't care. I said, that's awesome. Then don't bother writing the essays, because that's time that you could spend working on the other sections and not using that brain energy to write an essay. I said, but get that in writing first. because you don't want them to come back and say, oh, nobody told you that. So, if your program really doesn't care about the writing section and says, yeah, you can get a 0, then by all means, don't write essays, just skip through that section. But get that in writing, and maybe confirm it once or twice too before taking that kind of risk. The score report timeline. So the day you take the exam, when you submit your exam for scoring, you will immediately get an unofficial score report. So when you walk out of the test center that day, you know what your score will basically be for the quantitative and for the qualitative sections, the verbal and the math sections. Obviously, the essays take a little longer to grade. A computer can't grade essays for us yet, so you'll have to wait for that score to come in. They have score select is their catchy phrase for telling you that you can submit whichever scores you want, so you don't always have to submit all of your GRE scores. So there's no reason not to submit your test for scoring, because if you don't like the score you get, you don't have to report it that day. And if you want to hide that score and pretend it never happened, you don't ever have to report it if you don't want to. So go ahead and get the score report. Chances are you'll probably do better than you think you did on test day. I know I personally, when I took my GRE score, thought I had done terrible and horrible, and I was about to go, cry in shame about how bad I was at this test. I work in the honors college. How could I not do well on this? I did fine. Thank you very much. I did so well that they let me teach GRE prep courses. So obviously I did okay. But I thought it was hard that day because the test does adjust itself to your level. So you should be facing questions that are difficult for you no matter how well you are doing on the exam. So submit your scores, get the score back, and then decide if you want to report them to your schools or not. Okay. The official score report takes 10 to 15 days for you to be able to log in and see it online, and to be able to report them to the schools you're applying to. So, with that in mind, make sure that you register early for your GRE exam, so that way you have enough time to take the test, have the official score report become available, and get sent to the schools you're applying to. And you'll have to register yourself through the GRE website. The GRE website has a lot of good resources, but that is where you'll go to register for the exam as well. Unless they've added a new testing center recently, the closest one to UCF is actually in Maitland, so keep that in mind. Of course, you can always take it if you go home for the holiday break or summer break. You don't have to take it here near UCF. It's offered all over the country. And the nice thing about when it's being offered, it's not like the SAT where everybody comes in on a set Saturday and sits in a auditorium or gymnasium to take the test together. It's kind of individualized, so you'll sign up for a Monday, a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever day works best for you, at 8:30 or 12:30 or 3 o'clock or whatever time works best for you. So it's a little more individualized than when you take the exam. My advice would be pick the time of day that you are most awake. If you're not a morning person, don't take the GRE at 8 a.m. It will not end well, okay? Keep in mind traffic as well. If you're going to Maitland and you're going to take I-4 to get there, that's going to be some extra travel time because it's gridlock essentially during parts of the morning. So pick the time and the date that works best for you, and that also gives you enough time to get your scores reported to the programs you're applying to, okay?
If anyone else wants ice cream, now's the time. We're
Yep.
going to put it away in like 2-3 minutes.
Let's go.
So, let's go.
I won't be offended if anyone wants to go get ice cream, I promise. Alrighty. So when should you take the GRE? The scores are good for 5 years, so obviously don't take it 6 years before you plan to go to grad school. For a lot of students, if you're planning to go immediately after college, your junior year, your senior year, either one is fine. Unlike the SAT where you may learn more useful math that will help you on the GRE, you're probably not going to cover the math you need for the GRE in college, because the highest math is like high school math. So maybe even earlier might be better, so you can remember all of the math. Although you do get more vocabulary in college, so it's kind of a trade-off, whichever one you think you might be stronger in. But again, 5 years after that, your scores go away and you have to start over taking it again. Make sure the official score reports make it to your schools, as I said. Maybe you might want to save time for a retake just in case. I'm a worst case scenario planner, so if I'm going to plan this in an ideal world, I'd make sure that I have enough time maybe to take it again. You can take it once per 21 days and no more than 5 times in a 365-day period. Okay, so keep that in mind. If you do need to retake, the GRE website offers a GRE diagnostic tool that can help you identify where your weak areas were from your first take. And so that way you know where to focus your studying in order to do better next time around. And it's a free service. You don't have to pay anything extra for it. So just be aware of that if you do plan to retake. How long should I spend preparing? A lot of that will depend on how much free time you have. And also how much math or vocabulary help you might think that you need. I recommend, don't plan the GRE too far out. Don't start studying too far in advance of your test date, because you'll lose that sense of urgency. You'll start putting it off. You have real homework for real classes that's being graded more immediately, so you might focus on that and put your GRE prep to the side. But don't wait too late, because if you're trying to study for it last minute, you might panic and not get as much out of your study time. But that answer really is very personalized. I myself, was telling Rex this earlier today, my Time Hop app is reminding me that it was about 10 years ago this week that I took the GRE myself. And it was one of those situations where I decided on September 23rd that I was going to take the GRE on October 19th. So I gave myself not even a month, because I wanted to get the deadlines in time to apply to grad school for spring semester, for January. And I did fine, but I did GRE prep like every day leading up to it to make sure I had the time to cover everything. And it was fun trying to remember how to do all of that math and how to even study, because I was about 5.5 years after undergrad before I decided I was going to go for my master's. So for me, that timing works great. For somebody else, that might not work at all. So it really is a personalized decision of how long you need to take into account your strengths, your weaknesses, your schedule, what you know about yourself in terms of setting aside that time. But I'd say anywhere from 3 weeks to 9 weeks is probably a good range for most students, especially most honors students who tend to do pretty well on standardized tests in general. So how do you prepare? First thing I recommend is take a diagnostic test, whether that's a practice test from somewhere, or if you do get one of the GRE prep books, almost all of them have a diagnostic test for you to start with. A diagnostic test can be a great place to check where your baseline is, where are you starting from, what do you already know, what do you need to work on. And the diagnostic test may give you a result that makes you sad. I almost cried when I took my first diagnostic test, because again, it's been a long time since I'd had to solve for X or do any of this math stuff. I got better, and you will too. But the diagnostic test gives you an idea of how much work you really need to do on your GRE prep. I said I really recommend, there's a lot of different prep books that are out there that you can work through. I personally use the Barron's GRE book, and I also use that when I teach my GRE prep courses. I felt like it had a good balance between the difficulty of the questions and the amount of explanation you got on the math topics and things like that. But any book will work for you probably, and there's a lot of free resources as well on the GRE website. When you get a book, they let you do practice questions by content area. So tackle, okay, I'm going to do arithmetic now. I'm going to learn percentages again, and fractions, and proportions. I'm going to start working on algebra. How do I solve for X? Geometry. How do I find the area of a triangle? Kind of do it by content area to where you learn the content. Then do practice paper tests so that you mix all the different content areas together. And then make sure you do at least one computer-based practice test, because as I said, that computer-based test does have a different component to it, because you can't scratch out answers that you don't like. You can't draw on the test. It's on a computer screen. So you need to practice working with that. And then once you've done all that, you'll be ready to ace the GRE, all right? So some free resources for preparing, because I like free resources. There's some available on the GRE website itself. Go straight to the source. The people who make the test have a lot of free stuff for you. One of the big things is they have Power Prep Online. It is a practiced version of the GRE, so it's just like the GRE you'll see on test day. And it should give you 2 versions of the test. So you can take 2 practice tests in a computer version for free just by going to the GRE website. They also have a paper-based test book. They have a giant PDF math review, all the math concepts they expect for you to know for the GRE. And they also have links to Khan Academy videos. They have a partnership with Khan Academy, so if you need to see somebody doing math to learn it, the Khan Academy videos can help with that. There's some other free resources out there, websites. Majortest.com/GRE has practice math questions, verbal questions. Magoosh.com/GRE. That site's going to try to sell you tutoring. Don't buy their tutoring. You don't have to do that. I'm not saying please go give them money. But they do have a lot of free things on their website that I found useful as a GRE test prep instructor. I borrowed some of my lectures from their instructor blogs. So read the blogs. Every Wednesday they'll have like Vocabulary Wednesday. Here's 5 GRE words you might want to know and why they tie together, how to remember them. So take advantage of their free stuff. You don't necessarily have to give them money. Wordnik.com for definitions and AL Daily for reading material. The best way to improve your verbal score is to read. Read from a variety of different resources and read things that are more involved than Twitter feeds. I would used to say Facebook posts, but I know y'all aren't on Facebook anymore, so we'll go with Twitter feeds. You need to be able to read things that are not too lengthy, but a little lengthy, and also read outside your comfort zone. If you're a science major, don't just read the biology articles. You need to read things from English literature, from history. Vice versa, if you're a social science major, don't be afraid of biology essays. So that AL Daily has just a wide range of essays that become available every day, and it doesn't hurt to read them just to get familiar with reading things outside your comfort zone, run across vocabulary that you might not encounter in your classes, and to kind of train your brain not to panic when you see a subject area that you're not comfortable with. Because the GRE will have reading sections from all different areas, from English to education to history to biology, and you need to be able to read all of them for comprehension. And the Wordnik is nice for definitions because it doesn't just give you the definition of a word, it also gives you the etymology, where it comes from. That might be able to give you a little clue for helping to remember it. And also they provide context. Where does this word get used? Because sometimes the context clues is going to help out with the verbal questions on the GRE. As mentioned, prep books are useful. Test prep courses. So again, I taught for UCF test prep. There's also Kaplan, there's also Princeton. My usual advice for honors students is that you probably don't need a test prep course, because if you got into the honors college in the first place, you're probably pretty okay with standardized tests. I might be making a grand assumption, but usually you had to do all the standardized tests to get into the honors college. So you'll probably be okay. But if you are the type of student that needs somebody to give you a lesson plan, to tell you this is what you study this week, this is what you study this week, this is what you study this week. If you need a teacher to kind of work out the math problems with you, maybe then a test prep course would be useful. UCF test prep does tend to be a lot cheaper than the other options if you have a UCF affiliation. But the other ones have some more tools that UCF test prep may not have. So I encourage you to look at all your options if you are going to go with the test prep course. But I only recommend this in the most extremist situations where you need a lot of help, or if you're just, yourself and you're not going to do it unless you have a teacher telling you, do your homework this week, do your homework this week, okay? If you have a quick question, like I said, email me. You have my card. Don't hesitate to contact me. If you have any questions at all about the GRE, I'm happy to talk it out with you, give advice. If you need to schedule a meeting with me, I can meet with students to talk about GRE stuff too. All right. So I have on this sheet here, people pass it around. This has some of the websites that I mentioned for the program, and pass it around. As well as a brief overview again of the test format and the GRE scores, all the things I just covered about format, and some useful free resources. So feel free to take that home with you. Any questions about the test in general, test format, what to expect, not the specific content? Awesome. So in that case, I will start talking about what to expect from the content areas, the different types of questions and things you'll work on the GRE, all right? So analytical writing, as I said, that's the first section you'll always see is the essay writing. You will need to write 2 essays. You get 30 minutes per essay. The first essay is presenting a perspective on an issue. This is basically make an argument and defend it. You'll be presented with a question that probably doesn't have just one right answer. Maybe it might be something along the lines of, historians and engineers, or historians are more helpful than engineers in today's society, or might say it the other way around. And then you need to decide whether you want to support that, refute that, or support some of it while refuting other parts of it, okay? So make an argument, the type of writing you've done in pretty much any writing course you've had at the college level. The argument task is a little more interesting. The argument task, they'll present you with an argument somebody has made and tried to support, and it's your job to pick apart that argument. It's not going to be a very good argument, so there'll be at least 3 flaws for you to find and pick out in that argument. And you get 30 minutes for each of those essays. Really the best resource I've found for preparing for the writing section is the GRE website itself. Go to the GRE website, go to the section where it says prepare for the test, and then there'll be the analytical writing. One will be for the issue, one will be for the argument task. Go through those links, look at all the different things they have. They have the grading rubric, so what makes a 6? What makes a 5? What makes a 4? They'll also have graded essays, like an essay that was actually a 6, along with the reader comments of why was this a 6? Then a 5, why was this one a 5? A 4, why was this one a 4? You'll also see all of the prompts that could possibly show up on test day. So not potential prompts, but the actual prompts that could show up on test day. Yes?
Is your writing score an average of like, is like issue and argument each graded on 6 and then average of those two?
Yes, and in addition to that, you have 2 readers for each essay. So you have 2 issue readers, 2 argument readers. They each grade your essay on a scale of 0 to 6, and they average those 4 scores together, rounding up to the nearest half point.
Thank you.
Yep. And if there's a significant difference between 2 readers' scores, like somebody gives you a 3, somebody gives you a 6, they'll bring in a 3rd reader to find out what happened there. But for the most part, that doesn't tend to happen. So again, you can find all the prompts there on the website. That being said, I think there's 200 prompts for the issue task and 200 prompts for the argument task. So while you could go there to find, like if you're gonna write practice essays, do it straight from the source, but the odds are not in your favor of actually getting the topic you're gonna get on test day. Could happen, but probability not so likely. So basically, do you remember the 5-paragraph essay? Tell them what you're gonna tell them what you just told them. Guess what? Dig that back out of memory because that's what's gonna do well on the analytical writing section. You're being graded on your fluency, your organization, and your technical English. So they wanna see how well you express your ideas, how organized you are in your writing, and how well you use the English language. And so for that organization part, they really want to see, tell them what you're going to tell them what you just told them. So if you can do that, chances are you'll get at least a 3.5, 4 or higher on the GRE writing section. If you can put together an argument and provide evidence to support it, you're definitely getting a 4 or higher. That's probably what you'll find if you go and read the graded essays there on the GRE website. Yes?
So this is typed since it's on the computer?
It is typed on the computer. And so it is done in like their own word processing program. It's kind of basic. So it doesn't have things like copy and paste. It doesn't have autocorrect for your spelling. So be mindful of that. So that might be a good time to pull up that Power Prep program I talked about that you can get from the GRE website where you can actually practice writing essays in it. You don't necessarily have to write to the prompt they give you. You can write to whatever essay you feel like. So if you've exhausted the 2 prompts you got as practice tests, go find more prompts from the GRE website if you need to. That way you get used to the idea of not having all of the nifty tools that Word and other programs like that have nowadays. Oh yes, Jessica?
Do you have access to scratch paper for the writing section?
You do.
Cool.
So you can use that for brainstorming. I do recommend doing some brainstorming before launching into writing right away. Another piece of advice I like to give when preparing for the writing section, it may not be a bad idea, do some brainstorming, come up with the points you're going to make. Write the body first, so make your points and support them, then write your conclusion, then write your introduction. Because if you do that, your conclusion and your introduction will sound very similar, which shows the reader that this is what I'm going to tell you, this is what I just told you. Instead of if you start with the introduction, meander in the body, and end up over here with your conclusion, it doesn't look as organized. So it's okay to do that. You can write things in whatever order you want. It also helps if you're like me, anytime I start writing something, I want a good sentence to start with, something to catch the hook, to catch the attention. And if I can't find that, then I'm gonna sit there staring at the screen forever. You don't have time for that. You've got 30 minutes to see the prompt, brainstorm, get your essay written, okay? So as you're doing your other parts, you might be like, oh, this is how I should start it. And then you can put it in at whatever point instead of staring until that hook gets you to start writing, okay? But again, they're really looking for very basic structured writing. Don't surprise them with a surprise, thesis at the end. Or a surprise, I'm gonna argue the other side rather than the part I just argued the whole way through. Like, make a clear argument, support the argument, in the conclusion, tell them what you just told them. In the introduction, tell them what you're gonna tell them. Yes?
So you're not supposed to have a rebuttal paragraph?
You can. So you can choose to support some and not other parts, or again, it's always a good idea to bring up the other side. So maybe have 2 paragraphs of support and then a rebuttal paragraph. And the rebuttal paragraph kind of helps to show, yes, I'm aware of the complexity of this issue because especially for the issue task, they're not usually designed to be something that has a straight answer. So showing that you're aware that this isn't something that has an easy answer can get you some points. Yes?
Do they tell you how long does it take to do?
You have 30 minutes to write it. So whatever you can spit out in the program in 30 minutes and have it be a cohesive and coherent argument is what they're gonna see. So yeah, they're not really supposed to be all that long because you don't have that much time to work on it. And in terms of the spelling thing, I want to come back to that. Yes, it won't autocorrect your spelling. No, you won't be terribly penalized for misspelling things. Unless you're like misspelling every other word and it's hard to understand the argument you're making, don't worry too much about spelling errors. Okay, so that'll be fine. Yes?
So is there a direct correlation between length of the essay and score, or not so much?
Not so much, because I think it's quite possible to meander away from the point with too long of an essay and to fail to support enough points if you have it be too long. So there's not necessarily a rule that it must be, you know, I mean, I keep talking about the 5-paragraph essay. It doesn't actually have to be 5 paragraphs. It's just probably a good mindset to be thinking about. So 5 paragraphs is a good length, but it's not the only correct length. Yes?
So for the 2 writing tasks, they're broken up into 2 different sections, which means after 30 minutes.
You're done with the first one?
You can't work on the first one.
Correct. You got to go back to the second, or got to move on to the second one. I will say when I was doing this, it took me up until the last possible minute to finish my issue task. Oh, here's another fun story. So as I'm writing my issue task, I think I have about 5 minutes left. I'm maybe putting the last touches on a changing word here or there. My computer turns off in the middle of my exam. Everybody's computer turned off in the room. And everybody's like, no, you could hear the no in the room. If this happens, do not panic, because they will just come and turn your computer back on for you and get you back to where you were. I had exactly the same amount of time left on the test, that section, so I didn't lose anything. I just had to go find the word I had literally just deleted so I could put another word back in its place so I didn't have a missing word. So, you know, if the worst happens and you lose power, it's gonna be okay. In fact, hey, I got a free break out of it, so woohoo. So yeah, don't panic if that happens. The argument task, I think I spent about half the time on it. Because that one just flowed well for whatever reason. The argument they presented was really bad, and I was able to come up with some really good ways to show why it was a bad argument. And I still got like a 5.5 on the writing section. So, you know, don't feel like you have to necessarily spend all 30 minutes. If you're done, you're done. Like, you know you're done. It's okay. Yes?
So do some people finish the test before other people?
Yes, because again, it's not like the proctored situation where everybody's in the room and you can only move on to the next section. When everybody else moves on to the next section, you can move at your own pace. So if you fly through sections and you know you're done, like, you can just move on to the next section. So while you should set aside 4 hours when you go to take the GRE exam, it may not actually take the full 4 hours. There's gonna be some time for security check-in, because they are pretty strict about the security. They're gonna like take your fingerprint, take your picture, things like that. Like, it's pretty scary, serious business there. But the test itself, again, there's the time that's set aside, 30 minutes for verbal sections, 30 minutes for the writing sections, 35 for the math, and then an experimental section. But you may not take all the time for each section if you don't want to. The downside is you can't go use that extra time to work on a different section. Like, once you've expired the time for that section, like, that section's done. Please come back.
This is just like what happened.
I know, right? Oh no, please come back and don't let me lose anything. Hooray. Okay. Any other questions about the writing section? Again, a lot of schools may not care. The schools that do tend to care, English writing programs might, because it is a style of writing that you may need to be able to teach to others. Philosophy programs tend to care because, especially the picking apart the argument task is something that's kind of unique to that field. But a lot of other programs would much rather use your personal statement to measure your ability to write rather than the GRE writing score. Do you have a question?
Yes, what's the score?
A 0 to 6 scale, scaled in half-point increments. Yes.
Do you know anything about like anthropology programs? Because they're like half science, half.
I would ask them.
writing.
Again, I would ask them, is there a minimum writing score? And is there an average writing score for your incoming class? And if they're like, I don't know, then they probably don't care. Like, if they can't come up with an average right away, then they probably don't care. And again, I really recommend go to the website, read the scored essays. The thing that will jump out at you is like, there's a huge gap between like a 4 and a 3. Like a 3, the argument really starts falling apart. They're not supporting their arguments. It's a clear difference. So as long as you can put together an argument in coherent English and do the 5-paragraph essay kind of thing, you're pretty much gonna get a 4 or higher. Okay. Verbal section. So there's 2 verbal sections that will count towards your score, 30-minute sections, 20 questions each. The types of questions you'll see, are reading comprehension, sentence equivalence, and text completion. Back in the day, we're going back 8 years or so now, the version I took had analogies and antonyms on it. So if you're like Googling around the internet looking for free resources for the GRE and you see analogies or antonyms show up, don't do analogies or antonyms. That is old GRE. Their reading comprehension may still be relevant because they didn't change that up too much, but don't waste your time learning analogies and antonyms. Be happy they're gone because they were kind of vocabulary without context. That's why they got rid of them, because they weren't really very fair to students. You either knew the word or you didn't. So at least all the vocabulary you'll see on the GRE now is in context. So the reading comprehension will be about half of each verbal section. You'll have different types of questions. Maybe has traditional multiple choice questions, pick one answer. There may be multiple answer, multiple choice. So there may be one or more correct answers. Or there may be select text and passage. Pick the sentence that most accurately answers the question. You might see like 1 or 2 of those at most on your GRE exam. But the reading comprehension, again, is about half of your verbal section. Text completions are about 1/4. You gotta pick the right word for each blank. So you'll have a sentence with 1 to 3 blanks, and each blank will have a corresponding column of answer choices. Pick the one word that corresponds to each blank, okay? The sentence equivalence, you'll have 1 blank in a sentence, you'll have 6 words to choose from, and you need to pick the 2 words that give the sentence the most alike meaning. So the 2 words that give the sentence the most alike meaning, okay? Only 2, no more, no less. There is no partial credit on either the text completion or the sentence equivalence, so you must pick all of the correct answers and only the correct answers when it comes to these multiple answer, multiple choice questions. So, tips for verbal questions in general, practice for reading comprehension, practice reading, practice answering questions about what you've read. You need to learn to read from comprehension. Even before you start practicing with reading comprehension questions, it may be useful to take things that you're reading, whether it's for class already or things from Arts and Letters Daily like I recommended, and just start reading. Read for 3 or 4 minutes, then close the book, cover the screen, look away from it, and ask yourself, what did I just read? Like, did you actually pay attention to what you just read? Because a lot of us get in the habit of skimming things for, information quickly just to get the general gist, but you really need to comprehend what you're reading for these reading comprehension questions. So if you're reading something and you can't summarize what you just read, what's the main idea, what are some key points that got brought up, you're not paying attention to what you're reading. So you need to practice doing that, reading first for comprehension. Make sure when you're doing reading comprehension questions that you can support your answer from the text. So as you're looking at answers, you're like, I like this answer. See if you can identify what in that passage makes you like that answer, because every correct answer will be supported with evidence from the text. There's traditional reading comprehension questions versus logical reasoning. So the traditional reading comprehension questions are things like, what is the main idea? What is the author, why is the author using this word? What does it mean in this context? Things like that. Logical reasoning questions are actually kind of borrowed from the LSAT, where it's coming up with what would the possible conclusion be? Which of these statements, if true, would invalidate the conclusion drawn by this author? So the traditional passages, like what's the main idea, you're going to read them for content and trust everything they tell you. When reading logical reasoning questions, be on the lookout for potential flaws in the writing, because again, the author may draw a conclusion that doesn't make sense. So if you're being asked about conclusions, assumptions, strengthening or weakening an argument, these are logical reasoning questions. Read with a more critical eye. Luckily, those passages will tend to be shorter in nature as well. So you're not going to have like a 5-paragraph logical reasoning question thing where you have to read carefully. Maybe more like 1 paragraph for those. Okay. Yes.
So for those sections, will we have the questions along with the passage
Yes,
up on screen?
That's a good question. So it'll be a dual panel screen. So you'll always have the passage in one panel, and then your first question will be there. So you'd want to read that first question first and figure out, is this a traditional passage or a logical reasoning passage? They won't cross the types of questions, basically. And so that way you kind of know what you're reading with. Am I reading with the mindset of comprehension, or if I'm reading for the mindset of arguments and conclusions and looking for flaws in an argument? And then once you answer the first question, you move on to the next question, the passage stays here, the new question pops up. So you'll always have the passage available to look at when dealing with these reading comprehension questions. Yes.
I found the logical reasoning questions really hard as I've been practicing because a lot of them you have to go with assumptions that don't even make sense. Do you have any other tips on?
Probably the big thing with those is to try to see if you can figure out like what conclusion is the author making. Either they've clearly stated it, or if they haven't, what conclusion do they seem to be making? And that's probably like the biggest key there, because a lot of the questions boil down to, can you understand what the author's conclusion is? Whether it's to support that, yes, this is the conclusion the author makes, or this is how, based on this author's conclusion, whether it's accurate or flawed, how would we strengthen that argument? Yes.
How dense are the readings? Like, is it academic journal type dense, or maybe something similar to what you would see in a textbook?
I would say it's probably more similar to a textbook than academic journal. It can vary depending on the difficulty level of the questions you're facing. But I feel like they're never quite, like they're not journal level, you must be an expert in this field dense. Because really, they go in expecting you know nothing about this subject. And in fact, I actually do better on the passages where I actually don't know anything versus the ones I do, because then I start making assumptions based on what I've learned about that subject area rather than just focusing on what information is provided in the passage. So again, don't expect that you need to be an expert in any of these areas to be successful in the passage. If it feels dense, it should still all be explained within the text. Like if they introduce a word you're not familiar with, they will define it in the text, whether through context clues or here's actually the definition of this. So don't feel like you have to go in knowing anything. You need to know what words mean, but you don't need to know like what the specific subject area is. And another big tip for verbal questions so the reading comprehension questions is if you can know what makes wrong answers wrong, it can be easier to identify what might be the right answer. So like basically process of elimination. If you can eliminate wrong answers, it can narrow your focus down to hopefully just the right answer, if not one or two that are more likely to be the right answer. So what makes wrong answers wrong? Answer choices that are too extreme. If they say all authors say this, or this never happens. You may be familiar with academic writing. We always leave ourselves some wiggle room, in case something comes out that proves our idea is wrong. So extreme answer choices will never be the correct answer on a reading comprehension, okay? If they assume, the answer choice assumes too much, if it starts pulling in outside knowledge or goes beyond the text, those are not going to be the right answer, or if they require you to assume anything. If it's a partially wrong answer, like there may be one part of the answer that's right and one part of the answer that's wrong. If any part of that answer is wrong, the entire answer is wrong. If a piece of the fruit is rotten, the whole fruit is rotten, please don't eat it, okay? So stay away from partially wrong answers. Beyond the scope of the passage, again, if the answer choice introduces brand new information that is beyond what the passage covers, it's not going to be the right answer. When they're asking for the main idea, bless you, which is a pretty common question type, what is the main idea of this passage? Be wary of answer choices that are too broad or are too narrow. So if it only covers one paragraph out of a 3-paragraph passage, that's going to be too narrow. If it covers a grander idea of the whole topic, well, that's going to be too broad, like Goldilocks. You don't want the one that's too broad, you don't want the one that's too narrow, you want the one that's just right, okay? And then also watch out for answer choices that are true statements but don't actually answer the question being asked. Make sure you're actually answering the question. The correct answer is the one that most accurately and most completely answers the question, all right? And what I found useful is I would usually be able to eliminate, maybe 2-3 answer choices as clearly being wrong answers because they fall into one of these categories. And then that lets me narrow my focus to the 2 answers to try to narrow between them which one is the correct answer. Yes?
When you're reading passages, is there any functionality to be able to like highlight or underline or star? No.
Sadly, no. The only time you have the ability to highlight in the passage is if the question is asking, pick the sentence that most answers this question. So again, your scratch paper is with you for your whole test time, so feel free to write down keywords or anything you want. Don't spend too much time taking notes because again, you only have 30 minutes to answer 20 questions. But if a little note helps you kind of keep focused on what you're doing, by all means go ahead and do that. Yes.
When I took AP language, my teacher told us that when test taking strategies, instead of like looking at the answers when you read the question, is read the question, think of the answer that you think is right, and then look for it.
Yes.
Would you say that would apply here, or was it better to go and eliminate bad answers?
No, I think it's okay to do that as well. If you like read the passage first, so you know what the passage is asking about, especially if it's not the first question that you're trying to answer here. And yeah, if you can look at the question and you think you have an idea what the answer is from reading the passage, by all means, go back to that part of the passage to confirm your answer and pick the right answer choice from there. That's great. This works if you can't do that from your answers and you feel like, okay, I just got to eliminate some answer choices so I can narrow my focus. Okay, but that is also a good strategy too. Other questions about the reading comprehension section? Okay. So the other types of verbal question, text completion again, fill in the blanks essentially. When you're doing text completion, it's a good idea to read the passage to get a feel for the style and tone, and try to plug in your own words first. Like, what word do you think should go in this blank? Because usually if you've done a lot of reading, you have a good sense for how sentences are going to flow, what type of words might show up here, based on the context clues surrounding it. You'll want to find one blank to work with and start from there, and you may not always start with the first blank. A lot of times when there are 2 or 3 blanks, it's easier to fill in the last blank and work back to the beginning. They do that on purpose just to trick you because they're mean. I feel like with the verbal questions, they're trying to trick you more than with the math questions. Math is, do you know it or not? The verbal questions is, how can we trick you? So, start at the end, work your way back to the beginning if you need to. And then once you've filled in the blanks, reread it to yourself, make sure it makes sense as a coherent whole. Because again, we have a good sense of, style and word choices when we do a lot of reading. The sentence equivalents. You may be tempted to say, okay, well, I have to pick 2 words that give the sentence the same meaning. So why don't I just pick 2 synonyms? That can work if you're running out of time. But if you have the time to look at the question, don't just do that. You'll want to try to fill in the blank yourself. Again, see if the word that you picked is there and a synonym of that word. If not, maybe reevaluate your assessment and see what other words might make sense. But if 2 synonyms work for the sentence, then they have to be the right answer. So, you can use the synonyms as a time saver if you're running out of time. Right? But be careful, because the correct answer might be 2 words that are synonyms, but you don't know one of the 2 of them, so you don't recognize that it's a synonym. So that's why it's good not to just be like, oh, these are synonyms, picking these, moving on, unless you have to because you've got 3 seconds before the section ends, that kind of thing. Yes.
So this is for the sentence completion section? Or the sentence equivalence section, sorry. So if you only get one of them right, you're supposed to pick 2. Does that give you half of the points?
No partial credit.
Okay.
So you must pick both words correctly, and that's the only way to get credit. So let's say you're working on a sentence equivalence question, and you can figure out what one of the words should be, and you're stuck with you've eliminated words that don't make sense. Because again, you can go through and just like with the other verbal questions, eliminate answers that don't make sense, because that word just wouldn't go there. Maybe you've got 2 more left you're looking at, and you know one of the words, and you don't know the other word, okay? Well, if the 2 words you know don't give the sentence the same meaning, don't pick the 2 words you know, because you will be wrong. You will not get credit for that one. Instead, you need to pick one of the words you know and the word you don't know, because that gives you a better, it's still a gamble, but it is a much better chance of getting the right answer than picking 2 words that you know, but don't give the sentence the same meaning. And you shouldn't have to stretch to make that meaning fit. They specifically want these very precise words that give a precise meaning to the sentence, okay? So that can be a little scary to do if you don't know all of the words that are in front of you, but it is a better gamble than picking 2 words you know that are definitely not both the right answer. And again, the best way to improve the verbal section is to work on your vocabulary and your reading. Read everything just to see more words in their natural habitat, because you never know the one that might actually end up showing up on test day. All right. But when you do want to work on the vocabulary, it can be handy to have some resources. And so one of the resources I have is the list of GRE high frequency words for the past 20 years. These 333 words have shown up the most often on the GRE exam. So it's a pretty comprehensive list. Now, obviously, you don't want to sit down and try to memorize all 333 words the night before the GRE exam. That's not going to work. You may want to kind of work on these words in batches, okay? So how I recommend approaching this list. First, start with words that you almost know, but not quite. maybe you're not comfortable using it in a sentence. You almost have that word. So you might as well work with it a little more. That way you do get comfortable with it and it can turn into a word that you know well and will be able to work with on test day. Then work on words you think you know, but you don't. We all have that friend or maybe a couple of friends who uses words and you're like, I don't know if that's how that word is supposed to be used, you know? And so sometimes we associate incorrect meanings with words. And so if there's any of these words that you're looking up the definition and you're like, oh, that doesn't mean anything like I thought it did. I thought it meant this. Break that association, because you don't want to see that word on test day and have a wrong definition in mind for it, because then you won't be able to work with that word, okay? You can also work with Greek and Latin roots can kind of be helpful like they were for the SAT, but the GRE has kind of moved away from Greek and Latin based words. They want words that you're going to be more likely to see in context. But if you do know some Greek and Latin roots, it might help possibly at least get some idea of what a word might be about. Maybe working these words in groups of anywhere from 5 to 10, because that's about what our brain can work with at any given time. And also be mindful of multiple definitions. Some words can have more than one meaning, and the GRE a lot of times will test you on that secondary or tertiary meaning. For example, the word list. If I say list, what is the first definition that pops into your mind? Kind of like the list like I just gave you guys, right? Yeah, list. What else can it mean? Does anyone know another meaning for it?
Lean to the side?
Yes, to lean to the side or not be upright, okay? So which definition do you think the GRE is going to test you on? Probably the leaning one. So keep that in mind as you're learning these words. Don't just look at the first definition that pops up. Look for secondary and tertiary definitions. And another thing, when you're working on these sentence equivalents or text completions and you see a very simple word among the answer choices and you're like, there's no way that's going to be the right answer. Oh, is there another meaning for that word I'm not considering? Try to think of that first, because it may be one of those deceptively simple words that has a different meaning to it that they're really trying to get at there, okay? So, keep in mind where else might I have heard this word used before? Is there another definition they might be going for, okay? So that is the verbal section. Any questions about reading comprehension, sentence equivalence, text completion, and vocab? All right. Math section. So with the math sections, you again have 2 sections that will count towards your score. They are 35 minutes apiece, 20 questions each. They cover arithmetic, algebra, geometry, data analysis, which is graphs. Again, you can find a complete list of math skills you're expected to know on the GRE website. The math that they expect you to know is pretty basic. We're talking like high school math, or for some of you guys, if you're advanced in your math sequence, probably middle school math. So have fun remembering that. I swear there was 1 or 2 things I was studying. I'm like, why are they testing me on elementary school math? This is dumb. But that's what the GRE wants you to do. The main reason behind, the logic behind the math section on the GRE is not that they really care if you can find the area of a triangle. What they really want is to see your problem-solving skill set. And the idea is everybody had to take this math at some point to get into college in the first place. So everybody has this toolbox somewhere in your mind. It might be rusty, it might be dusty, it may be hiding behind mountains of other boxes, but it's there. So they want you to dig it out, dust it off, and figure out what's the best tool to solve this problem. Which, using tools to solve problems is what grad school is all about. So it does make sense. It's just really annoying to remember how to do all this math again. So. The question types again, you might have what's the answer, pick one from multiple choice. You might have some that are multiple answer, multiple choices, which are the ones that could be the correct answers. You may have free response or numeric entry. There's a handful of one of these for tests that's where fill in the box, what's the answer? So you have to type in the answer. Data analysis, you'll have 3 questions of this type per section. So data analysis, here's a graph or a chart. Answer questions about this chart or graph or group of charts and graphs. Okay, so. And then quantitative comparisons. These are a more unique question type that I feel were on a really old version of the SAT, maybe the one Rex or I took way back in the day, right? So with quantitative comparisons, essentially you have 2 columns and you have to figure out which one's bigger. Is A bigger? Is B bigger? Are they the same? Or it depends. And usually if variables are involved, that's where the it depends might come into play. Because obviously it's not going to be like 3 and 6, which one's bigger? It's going to be a little more complicated than that. The idea behind the math, they wanted to create more real world problems and translations. So You might actually have to look at a chart or a graph when reading an article for grad school and pull data from it, so that's why they have those in there. And you'll see more of the data sets. Even in non-data analysis type questions, you may have a data set appear in a question. They ask you a percentage or a fraction, or maybe you'll see some very basic statistics showing up on the GRE as well, like, you know, what's the mean, or things like that. So, tips for math questions in general. Learn your formulas. You are expected to know formulas. They do not give you a cheat sheet. Luckily, I have created a cheat sheet that you guys can use to study. Please don't take this into the test center. I don't want your scores to get invalidated, but this might be useful in terms of helping you prepare for studying for the test. These are all the formulas you have to know for the GRE. So you'll notice the quadratic equation is not on there because you don't need to know that one, all right? It can be helpful if you have it memorized and use it in whatever crazy math classes you took beyond what I ever took here at UCF, but you don't have to know it. A lot of it's, you know, basic areas of shapes and things like that, right? So learn your formulas. It can also be helpful to know your formulas when you're facing a problem, a word problem. And in the word problem, they talk about finding the area of a triangle. Even if you just start with your scratch paper writing down, the area of a triangle is 1/2 base times height. That might be, okay, so, well, if I can find the base and I can find the height, I can find that area. Or if they give me the area and the base, I can use that to find the height. Writing down formulas can give you somewhere to start with on word problems. So it's useful to know them to apply them right away, but also to help give you direction on what to do with a problem. Don't do more math than you have to. You don't have to show your work on the GRE. If you get to the answer or get to a point where you can eliminate answers and find the right one, stop, you're done, move on to the next question, okay? Don't forget that you have a calculator, but also don't overuse the calculator. Please don't be typing in things like 2 times 2. Okay? Like basic math is faster to do in your head and move on, or do it on your scratch paper than to type it into the calculator, okay? And you'll see there are some problems that you can't use the calculator for. They're kind of math logic type questions. So the calculator won't solve everything. Use it when it's useful, like, you know, if you have, I don't know, 2063 times 52. Like, you know, okay, that's what the calculator's for. But more simple math or math logic calculator might not be needed. Don't assume drawings are to scale. This is a real big one. They may give you a drawing of a diagram that makes you think, oh, that looks like a right triangle there, okay? But what if it's not? Like, what if there's nothing in that problem that tells you this must be a right triangle? Don't assume it's a right triangle. And in fact, I would recommend doing a quick doodle on your scratch paper of drawing a different possibility so that you don't accidentally use rules that might not apply here, because if this is not a right triangle, you can't use right triangle rules, things like that. So don't assume the drawings are to scale unless they tell you they are, or they give you information that's like, okay, they say it's a square, and that look like they're the same length, so okay, that looks like a square, I can use this. But if like, this is a square, and it's like this and this, obviously that's not a square, don't trust that diagram, okay? Draw pictures. Drawing pictures is very helpful for math problems, again, especially for geometry problems. But even just to get an idea of what this problem is doing. They're meant to be real world problems, so you should be able to visualize it, and that might give you a better idea of what's going on in a problem, okay? Always ask yourself, what am I looking for? Especially in word problems. Maybe they give you an X, Y, and Z, you know, and you need to find Z, but it's easier to solve using X and Y. So okay, fine, solve for X or Y. Don't force the problem to solve for Z right away, but always go back to, is X what I was looking for? No, I need Z, okay. Is Y what I was looking for? No, I need Z. Is Z what I was looking for? Yes. Okay, now I can stop. So don't do more math than you have to, but also make sure you get to the right answer. And always keep in mind, what am I looking for? Area of the shaded region, or weird shapes. So you'll see there's a very limited number of formulas you have to memorize for areas of shapes, right? They don't include this piece of a circle, or, you know, we have a circle, like a bullseye going on here, and maybe that middle ring is shaded. There's not a formula for that, okay? So you might be asking, well, what do I do with that? Pretty much every time I've seen area of a shaded region, it involves finding areas that you can find using the formulas you know, and subtracting them from each other in a way that you're just left with the shaded region, okay? So imagining, again, like, you know, you've got a circle inside a circle inside a circle, area of big circle, subtract area of smaller circle, things like that until you're left with just the shaded region, all right? So it's gonna involve some subtracting if you're looking for an area of a shaded region. And also remember, areas can't be negative. So if you end up with a negative area, you probably are still on the right path. You just subtracted things in the wrong order. Try subtracting them in a different order. Multiple answer, multiple choice questions. So if they're like, pick all that could be right, all of the possible correct answers here. A lot of them will fall into, can you figure out what the smallest the answer can be? Can you figure out what the biggest the answer can be? And then just pick the ones that are in the middle, all right? If you're doing that, be mindful, is it greater than or greater than and equal to? Is it less than or less than and equal to? Because if it's equal to, include that lower bound or upper bound. If it is not equal to, do not include that lower bound or upper bound. Only pick the ones that come in between, okay? Numeric entry, when they ask you to type in an answer, they will almost always say round to the nearest percent, tenth, hundredth, whatever they want you to round to. Make sure you do that correctly, because if you have the right answer but the wrong rounding, it is the wrong answer. So always be mindful of what they want you to round to and do that. Remember, 5 and up, round up. Below 5, you round down, okay? And then data analysis, estimating where possible. When it comes to these graph questions, the idea behind graphs is to present data in a visual fashion. So you can do a little rounding where you need to make your math easy. Don't round like 5 percentage points, but like you can maybe round 1% point or something like that to make your math a little easier to work with, okay? You don't always have to have the exact answer, you just need to pick the answer that's closest to the correct answer in the multiple choice, because they're almost always multiple choice when it comes to the graph questions, okay? So those are kind of general math tips, kind of summarizing that Barron's book chapter. Back solving, one of my favorite strategies for working with math problems. You might have heard it as plug and chug. Like they give you answers, guess what? Plug them in, see which one works. Again, you don't have to show your math, you don't have to show your work. So if they give you answer choices to choose from and you don't know what else to do, start plugging them in to see which one works, okay? I recommend starting with C because on the GRE, your answers are arranged in either ascending or descending order. So if you start with C, you might be like, yay, that's the right answer, I'm done. Or you might be like, I need to go higher, so pick one of the higher numbers. Oh, I need to go lower, pick one of the lower numbers. Hopefully you won't have to test more than 3 if you do it this way, okay? If you start at A every time, if the answer is E, you've got to test all 5 of them. So that's why I recommend starting with C. I said it works when you have variables in your question but not your answers. Like obviously it's hard to plug X into Y, like what does that even mean? But if they give you numbers, like variables here, numbers here, plug the numbers in. It also works if you can't remember how to start a problem or if you get stuck part of the way through. Again, don't give up if you get stuck. You can always start plugging answers in to see which one works. And this might even be quicker than the real way. Rex has also done test prep instruction. In fact, he was the one who got me the job in the first place. And every time I'd go to him with a math problem, the first thing he would do is this. And I'd be like, why didn't I think to do it that way? Because I'm more of a, what's the right way to do it? Let me use my formula. And Rex would be like, oh, plug it in, there it goes. Yes, you're right, okay. So don't feel like it's cheating the wrong way. Who cares? Just get to the answer as fast as possible. Back solving is a great strategy. Practice using it as much as possible, honestly, because it can be quicker than the real way for a lot of things. Picking numbers, this is another really great strategy I wish I'd had before I took the GRE. If you can't find numbers to do the math with, then pick your own. This works really well if you have variables in your question and in your answer choices. So like if your answer choices look like alphabet soup, X times C times S versus X times C divided by S versus, like they're trying to help you figure out a number relationship. And if you're like me, I don't think that way. That's not how my brain works. I'm not a math person. So if I plug numbers in, I can do the math and figure out which one's the right answer. So pick answers for X and S and C, solve the question as presented, plug those same numbers again into those answer choices, see which one matches. Hooray, I can actually do math in this question. Also, if they give you percents, ratios, fractions, the CD is, on sale 60% off, and then it's on sale for 80% off the next day. What percent off is it? If you can do that math in your head, great, I hate you. I can't do that. If you are like me, you might need to say, okay, the CD is $100, and I'm going to calculate the 60% off, and I'm going to calculate the 80% off, and then I'm going to use that to determine what's the right answer, okay? It can also help with number properties problems. With quantitative comparisons, again, column A versus column B, if there's variables involved, start picking numbers to plug in. Because that can kind of, again, help you see that relationship going on. And be nice to yourself when picking numbers. Like, you don't have to pick realistic numbers. Let's say you get a problem that says a school cafeteria uses X cans of soup each week for S number of students. How many weeks will Y number of cans last? Okay? Well, yes, the school probably doesn't have 5 students, but guess what? You can use 5 anyways. They probably don't just use 10 cans of soup each week, but guess what? You can say they do. Pick numbers that play nice with each other, and pick numbers that make for easy math. Don't feel like you have to pick an actual 2,000 students in the school. Don't make math harder on you than it needs to be. Pick numbers that play nice and that are easy to work with, okay? Because the idea behind these questions is the relationship between numbers. So whatever numbers you pick, they will work as long as you do your math correctly. So be nice to yourself. Quantitative comparison questions. So I said, which one's bigger? Is A bigger? Is B bigger? Are they the same? There's a little more to it than that. It's really, you pick A if A is always bigger, no matter what. You pick B if B is always bigger, no matter what. You pick C if they are the same, no matter what. So D basically means none of the above, or as I like to think of it, it depends. So it depends what numbers are being used here. Sometimes A might be bigger, sometimes B might be bigger, sometimes they're equal. So when I approach a quantitative comparison problem, I try to make the answer be D. I try to make them equal and try to make them not equal. Because if I can make the two columns equal and I can make them not equal, the answer has to be D. And I keep doing this with different types of numbers. If I keep getting the same answer every time, guess what? That's my answer. If I get 2 different answers at any point, the answer is D, okay? The numbers I like to test, like 0, 0.5, or 1/2, use a fraction or a decimal. Use a positive number, use a negative number. Because those are the number properties they're testing for. 0 does certain things, positive numbers do certain things, negative numbers do certain things, and then fractions or decimals do certain things. If you can test all of those number types, and wow, A is bigger again, it's bigger again, it's bigger again, guess what? The answer is going to be A, all right? But at any point you get 2 different answers, the answer is D, all right? So try to make the answer be D, and if you can't, then hey, you got your answer. If there are no variables involved, the answer cannot be D, because it only depends if there's different numbers that you can plug into the situation. So if there is no variation or variables involved, the answer can't be D. So if you're really stuck and you're playing eeny, meeny, miny, mo, what answer is it? Because again, every question should have an answer filled in, because you are not penalized for guessing. But if there's no variables, don't guess D, because you're wrong. All right, pick A, B, or C. If there are variables involved and there's no constraints on what you can make the variable be, if you're having to guess, I would guess D. Try to do the math so you don't have to just guess, but if you do have to guess, the answer is most likely going to be D. Because again, 0 does certain things, decimals do certain things, positive numbers do certain things, negative numbers do certain things. Okay? Alrighty. Did I run over on my timer? Go about 15 minutes. I'll do a quick show of hands. Would you rather do practice verbal questions or math questions? Who'd rather see verbal questions? Who would rather see math questions? All right, so I'm going to skip to the math questions. If you're able to stay late, I'll do verbal questions with you, or I'll just send you my stuff via email, whatever works best, okay? So, all right, so sample math questions. All right, I have handouts here with all the questions on it. So, please. All right, so I'm done with the lecture part. If you really don't care about doing practice questions, don't feel like you have to stay around. I will leave my cards right over here, so if you did not get one and need to grab one, go ahead and do that. And I'm going to grab my markers and move myself over this way because I have to do math on a board because I'm old school and don't know how to use technology. So. All right, so on page, third page or second piece of paper front side.
Oh no, I think it's all on the same page.
Alrighty, so this is an example of a multiple choice, select one answer kind of question here. So we need to pick the right answer. If 5x plus 32 equals 4 minus 2x, what is the value of x? How do I solve for this?
You have to isolate x.
Okay, so I can solve for x. That's one way to approach this. All right, so I need to basically remember how to do algebra, so middle school math, yay! All right, so the first thing I want to do is get all of my x on one side. So I'm going to do that by adding 2x to both sides. All right. And then I need to get everything that's not x over to the other side. I'm going to subtract 32 from both sides. And then I don't want 7x, I want 1x. So I need to divide both sides by 7 to do that. And I end up with x equals 4. Is that one of my answer choices? Hooray, thank goodness it is. So I can pick C and move on. What's another way I could do this if I forgot how to solve for x?
Plug in values.
Plug in the values. So I could have just plugged in, an answer choice. And in this case, I would have plugged in 4, and it would have worked out just fine with just the first one I checked. Yes?
It should be negative.
I'm sorry?
Because you subtracted.
Thank you. It's been a while since I've done these questions. Yes, if I do anything that looks weird, don't be afraid to correct me. It's been a little while since I've had to teach. So don't forget your negative signs. Very important. All right, so I could have plugged in answer choices and checked, okay? So let's say I'm going to do the plug and chug or back solving method, and I'm going to start with answer choice C because I always start with answer choice C. So I'm going to plug in 4 for each of these x's. Do my math right on that one? I mean, other than the fact that obviously 52 does not equal negative 4. Yeah, okay. So I got, 52 equals negative 4. Is that right? No, definitely not. So I would not pick that answer choice. And I would just pick a direction to move and start plugging in others, or maybe realize, that's a really big gap. Maybe I need a smaller number to kind of separate the gap between those two. All right? And just plug in until I get the right one. Which I did. There you go. So if I do plug in negative 4, I get 12 equals 12. Yay, I found the right answer. Okay. Any questions on that example? Okay. Question number 2 says, which of the following integers are multiples of both 2 and 3? Indicate all such integers. This is an example of you can pick more than one correct answer. If you're actually on the GRE itself, something I forgot to mention, if you're on the GRE itself, if you can pick more than one answer, the answer choices will be indicated by boxes, not ovals. Boxes, not ovals. So if you see a box like this, that is your visual cue that, hey, I might want to pick more than one answer here. If it's sentence equivalence, you do want to pick exactly 2 correct answers. If the answer choices are ovals, you want just one answer. You'll also notice if you try to pick more than one answer with ovals, it'll move your answer. If you try to pick more than one answer with boxes, it will continue to fill in answers. Okay? Yes?
And sometimes, like, say, select all the applying with the boxes, but only one would be correct.
Yes. So if it says select all that apply, the correct answers, there could be 1, 2, 3, all of them. There will always be at least one. It will never be the case that no answers are correct and that you should not pick an answer. Okay? So always pick at least one if you're eeny, meeny, miny, moe. All right. So again, moving on to number 2, which of the following are integers of both which of the following integers are multiples of both 2 and 3? Indicate all such integers. How do you know if an integer is a multiple of 2? It's even. Ends in 2, 4, 6, 8, or 0. How do you know if an integer is a multiple of 3? There's a little trick to it for multiple digit numbers. If you add up the digits and the number you get is divisible by 3, that entire number is divisible by 3. So for example, if I look at 12, 1 plus 2 is 3. 3 is divisible by 3, therefore 12 is divisible by 3. So I want even numbers that can be divided by 3, essentially. So which of these are even numbers that can be divided by 3?
C, D, and F.
C, D, and F, 12, 18, and 36 are all even numbers that can be divided by 3. Okay? If you had to, you could plug each of them into the calculator, but again, that would take a lot longer than thinking about, okay, how is it a multiple of 2? It's even. How is it divisible by 3? That little trick. Which of these numbers fit both of those? Okay? But if in doubt, you could brute force it with the calculator. All right? Any questions on that one? All right. Numeric entry. There's a lot of directions on how to enter things into the box. But essentially with numeric entry, you're going to have to type something into a box. All right. Question number 3 asks, rectangle R has length 30 and width 20 and square S has length 5. The perimeter of S is what fraction of the perimeter of R? So the perimeter of S is what fraction of the perimeter of R? All right. So that means I need to find S and R. All right. So how do I find the perimeter of a square?
4S.
4S. You add up all the sides, and since a square has all the same sides, it's 4 times S. So that would be 4 times S. And did they give me S in this question? They said it's 5. So 4 times 5, which is 20. Okay? Now on to the perimeter of R, which is rectangle R. How do I find the perimeter of a rectangle?
2L plus 2W.
Add up all the sides again. So a rectangle will have 2 lengths and 2 widths. 2 lengths plus 2 widths. What is the length of rectangle R? 30. And what is the length, what is the width of rectangle R? I'm sorry, what was it? 10, thank you. And so if I have 2 times 30 is 60, plus 2 times 10 is 20, 60 plus 20 is 80. I can put my answer in just like this. When it comes to numeric entry, any equivalent fraction will work. So while you might be tempted to like, oh, that's 1/4. Okay, fine. If you can do it that fast, plug it in. But you don't have to simplify. As long as all of your digits fit in the boxes, just plug it in just like that. Okay? Let's see. What time is it?
351.
Okay. I want to skip to a quantitative comparison question. If you want the answers to the rest of these, just email me and I will email you my answer key. So, but I want to get to quantitative comparison because I feel like that's a little more interesting. All right. So question number 5, again, we're trying to figure out which is bigger, column A or column B. So question number 5, we have 2 times 6 in one column, 2 plus 6 in another column. So what answer would I choose? Is A always bigger? Is B always bigger? Are they always equal, or does it depend?
A is always bigger.
A is always bigger because 2 times 6 is 12, 2 plus 6 is 8, 12 is always bigger than 8. Obviously, they're not going to be this easy. It's more just get you used to the idea. You might be more likely to see something like number 6. Okay. For column A is x squared, column B is 2x. So there's variables involved here. So it's not going to be as straightforward. So what I would do is pick some numbers to plug in and see what happens. So what number should I test? 45 is way too big. Don't be mean to me.
3.
3. We'll go with 3. So 3 squared is 9. 2 times 3 is 6. So if the answer had to be 3, my answer would be A. Okay. What's another number I can test?
2.
Let's try a different type of number. Let's see what happens if x is -3. No, that's not going to help. Let's see what happens if x is 0. I love to test 0 if I have a chance. 0 is one of the first things I'm going to test. So 0 squared is 0. 2 times 0 is 0. Oh, look, I made them equal. If I am testing numbers and I get 2 different answers, I stop there. Immediately, my answer is D. It depends. Okay? So you're plugging numbers in, just test them, kind of get an answer. Okay, if this had to be the answer, this had to be the number, that's the answer. If this had to be the number, that's the answer. As soon as you get 2 different answers, stop. The answer is D. Okay? Yes.
So would they give you that question, for example, with a qualifier if x is greater than or equal to 2?
They could.
Okay.
So they might say something like, yeah, it was not on there, but let's say they did something like, if they put something up here, a qualifier that applies to both columns equally. So they said 0 is less than x is less than 1. This is GRE speak for x is a decimal or fraction. Because if it's between 0 and 1, it is a decimal or a fraction. Okay? So in this case, I might start testing some decimals or fractions. I'm gonna do fractions just because I learned this with fractions, but decimals might be easy with your calculator. Either way works, okay? So if I have 1/2 times 1/2, I get 1/4. If I have 2 times 1/2, I get 1. Which column is bigger?
B.
B, all right. Let's say X is, go with 1/9. 1/9 times 1/9 is like 1/81. 2 times 1/9 is 2/9. So which is bigger, 1/81 or 2/9? 2/9 is bigger, so B is bigger. So basically I would probably plug in 2 or 3 of these to get a feeling for it. I would find that B gets bigger every time. So if you do put this restraint on, it changes the problem. And the answer would be B, okay? Because the real way to do this is to know that every time you have a fraction or a decimal, the more power you raise it to, the smaller it gets. But I don't have that memorized. Instead, I'm just gonna plug in a few fractions and see what happens. I keep getting the same answer, okay, then that's gotta be my answer. I can't test 0, I can't test a negative number, I can't test like 1 or 3 or whatever. This is what I'm stuck with, so these are the answers I keep getting, so that's gonna be my final answer. Okay. All right. So I apologize for running over on time, but if you guys do have any other questions for me, don't hesitate. Oh, am I over on time? Or do I have time? I have time for one more. I have time for one more. We're gonna do this last one, sorry. All right, so that last one, number 7 here. X squared plus 1 versus 2x minus 1, all right? And this one doesn't have any constraints. But I'm still gonna test my favorite numbers. So I'm gonna start by testing 0, see what happens. 0 squared plus 1 versus 0 minus 1. That means that A is bigger, okay? What happens if I pick a fraction? If I have 1/2 squared plus 1, I end up with 1 1/4. If I have 2 times 1/2 minus 1, I end up with 1 minus 1, which is 0. A is bigger again. Positive number. 3 squared plus 1 is 10. 2 times 3 minus 1 is 5. I made A bigger again. And a negative number. So I have -3 squared. Do I end up with +9 or -9? +9. If I have 2 times -3, is it +6 or -6? -6. And so I tried all my number types. I ended up with A all 4 times. Therefore, my answer is going to be A. I've tested all the different number properties they're looking for. The answer has to be A. Okay? Alrighty. So again, if you want the answers to the verbal ones, feel free to email me. I'll email you back my answer key. If you have any questions as you're preparing for the GRE, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to help. Like I said, whenever I get a math problem, Rex and I and Madi have fun. Because Madi will come in and like apply physics logic to it, and Rex and I are like, that's way too complicated. Here's the simple math version of it. But we're always very happy to help with that. And I wish you all the best on the GRE.
Can everyone thank Brandy with me?